Right now, as you read these words, 700 acres of the most expensive real estate in the United States is physically detaching from the North American continent. This is not a metaphor for a falling market or a shifting demographic. In Rancho Palos Verdes, California, a mere 25 miles south of the glass towers of downtown Los Angeles, the ground is quite literally sliding into the Pacific Ocean. This is the Portuguese band landslide complex, and in the last 36 months, the clock of geological time has been smashed. What was once a slow, imperceptible crawl has transformed into a high-speed structural collapse. NASA satellites, orbiting hundreds of miles above, have confirmed the terrifying velocity of this movement. The land is displacing at a rate of up to 4 inches every single week. To put that in perspective, the ground is moving 80 times faster than it was just 3 years ago. This is no longer a slow-moving disaster. It is a catastrophic event occurring in real time, rewriting the map of the California coastline before our eyes. The scale of the crisis is staggering. A landslide complex that covered 300 acres in 2022 has more than doubled, now consuming over 700 acres of buckling asphalt, fractured foundations, and snapped utility lines. This is a landscape in active, violent transition. At 11:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, a resident might watch a hairline fracture in their driveway expand into a 6-inch chasm by sunset. The city has already poured $64.4 million into a desperate, perhaps futile attempt to arrest the slide. Money spent on dewatering wells and massive grading projects. But the geologists from the United States Geological Survey and local monitoring teams are reaching a grim consensus. This cannot be stopped. The acceleration is so aggressive that it has triggered a cascading failure of modern civilization's most basic requirements. For 21 months, 135 homes have existed in a state of primitive survival, their natural gas lines severed to prevent an explosive catastrophe. Another 245 homes were plunged into darkness when Southern California Edison cut electricity with only 24 hours of notice, citing the extreme risk of live wires sparking a wildfire as the ground twists the power poles like toothpicks. Governor Newsom has declared a state of emergency, but as the 700-acre failure plain continues to lubricate and slide, the emergency isn't just about the houses. It's about the very concept of permanent settlement on a coast that has decided to move. At 8:14 a.m. on February 12, 2026, a GNSS station designated as PV-04 anchored into the rugged slopes of the Palos Verdes Peninsula registered a horizontal displacement of 14.2 centimeters in a single 7-day window. For the geophysicists monitoring the telemetry at the United States Geological Survey, USGS, and the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory in nearby Pasadena, the data confirms a nightmare scenario. The acceleration is no longer linear, it has become exponential. To understand why this 700-acre mass is moving, you have to look beneath the multi-million-dollar estates and the coastal scrub, deep into the stratigraphy of the Altamira Shale. Roughly 100 feet below the surface lies a geological trap set a quarter of a million years ago. It is a thin, treacherous layer of bentonite, an altered volcanic ash that when dry is as firm as rock, but when saturated transforms into a sleek, soapy slurry. This is the failure plain. It doesn't just support the land, it tilts at a rhythmic, deadly angle toward the Pacific Ocean. The physics of the current collapse are driven by extreme pore water pressure. For decades, this massive system was in a state of precarious equilibrium, moving at perhaps a fraction of an inch per year. But the record-breaking atmospheric rivers that battered Southern California in 2023 and 2024 fundamentally changed the subterranean calculus. Billions of gallons of rainwater didn't just wash away into the sea, they percolated. The water traveled through the porous basalt and fractured sedimentary rock, eventually pooling on top of that impermeable bentonite clay. We are seeing a total loss of frictional strength along the basal slip surface, says Doctor. Marcus Thorne, a senior geologist specializing in mass wasting. The water acts as a hydraulic lubricant, effectively lifting the entire 700-acre mass and allowing gravity to take over. Once that threshold of saturation is reached, you aren't dealing with a landslide anymore. You are dealing with a mass flow that behaves like a slow-motion glacier of rock and debris. The monitoring data from early 2026 reveals a terrifying synchronization across the entire peninsula. Previously, the Portuguese Bend, Abalone Cove, and Klondike Canyon slides moved as semi-independent units. Now, they have merged into what the city calls the Greater Portuguese Bend Landslide Complex. The shear forces are so intense that the very mechanical properties of the ground are failing. By mid-February 2026, Palos Verdes Drive South, the primary coastal artery for the region, has become a graveyard of civil engineering. Maintenance crews are working 24/7, not to repair the road, but to shave it, grinding down asphalt ridges that can rise 3 feet in a single week as the land buckles upward in a process known as toe heaving. Infrastructure vulnerability has reached a breaking point. The power grid is the most visible casualty. In late January 2026, Southern California Edison reported that the land movement was so aggressive that standard utility poles were tilting beyond their structural limits within 72 hours of being plumbed. The Tension Relief Strategy, an experimental effort using flexible modular cabling and transformers mounted on giant steel skids that can be dragged back into place, is the only thing keeping the remaining lights on. But this is a temporary fix for a permanent geological shift. The USGS warns that this is a coupled system collapse. The movement of the land alters the surface drainage, creating new fissures and sinkholes that funnel even more water into the deep slip plain, which in turn accelerates the slide. It is a self-reinforcing feedback loop of destruction. As of this morning, the displacement vectors show the slide is not just moving seaward, but is widening laterally at a rate of 1.5 inches per week, threatening neighborhoods like Rolling Hills and Seaview that were officially mapped as geologically stable only 3 years ago. The clock is ticking toward the point of no return, where the sheer volume of moving earth, estimated at over 60 million cubic yards, will possess too much kinetic momentum for any man-made intervention to arrest. The ground is quite literally running out of time. To understand the sheer inevitability of the collapse in Rancho Palos Verdes, we must look back a 250,000 years. The Palos Verdes Peninsula is not a solid mass of coastal granite. It is an ancient, multi-tiered landslide complex that has been shifting since the Pleistocene epoch. Geologists have identified at least 13 distinct wave-cut terraces, each a testament to the violent tectonic uplift of the California coast. But beneath the beauty of the bluffs lies a structural flaw that makes this region one of the most geologically unstable inhabited areas in North America. The history of this ground is written in the bentonite failure plain, a layer of volcanic ash that fell 15 million years ago, was buried under thousands of feet of sediment, and eventually tilted toward the sea by the same tectonic forces that built the Santa Monica Mountains. The modern crisis can be traced back to a single human intervention in the 1950s. In an era of unbridled post-war expansion, Los Angeles County decided to extend Crenshaw Boulevard across the top of what was then a dormant landslide zone. Engineers moved millions of tons of earth, unknowingly adding immense top-loading weight to the head of the slide, while simultaneously altering the natural drainage of the hills. By September 1956, the ground responded. In a terrifying display of geophysical force, the earth began to move, shearing the foundations of 140 luxury homes. The resulting lawsuit, which saw the homeowners win $10 million from the county, established a precedent of liability, but it did nothing to change the physics of the ground. Despite the 1956 event, development continued. By the early 2000s, The greater Portuguese band was kept with hundreds of high-value properties, swimming pools and septic systems, all of which acted as artificial injectors, pumping water directly into the ancient clay layer. The warning signs in the 21st century have been increasingly violent. In 1999, the 18th hole of the Ocean Trails Golf Club, then under construction, simply vanished into the Pacific. The landslide took 450,000 tons of earth and the developer's solvency with it. The property was eventually purchased by Donald Trump for $27 million, who rebuilt it into the Trump National Golf Club Los Angeles. Today, that billion-dollar course sits a mere half-mile from the active boundary of the expanding 700-acre failure zone. The parallels are chilling. The scale of the moving mass in Rancho Palos Verdes is now being compared by USGS researchers to the 1983 Thistle landslide in Utah, the most expensive landslide in US history, which moved at a rate of 25 feet per day and created a 220-foot-high dam. While the Palos Verdes movement is slower, the volume of earth in motion is comparable, roughly 60 to 80 million cubic yards of material. In terms of geophysical energy, the current acceleration represents a state of critical saturation. Standard civil engineering uses a metric called the factor of safety. An FOS of 1.5 means the slope is stable. An FOS of 1.0 means it is at the point of failure. Geotechnical models from 2025 and early 2026 suggest that large swaths of the Portuguese Bend complex now have an FOS of 0.98 or lower. Gravity has officially won the tug of war. This is a coupled system failure. As the land moves, it creates deep tension cracks called scarps. These scarps act as funnels for the next rainfall, bypassing the surface soil and delivering water directly to the slip plane 100 feet down. This is the hydromechanical feedback loop. This is not an isolated California anomaly. It is a preview of the Great Coastal Retreat facing the entire United States. According to a landmark study by the USGS, 72% of California's 1,100-mile coastline consists of actively eroding cliffs. In Pacifica, north of San Francisco, apartment complexes are currently being demolished as the cliffs beneath them retreat at rates of up to 3 feet per year. In San Clemente, the Lawson Rail Corridor, the second busiest passenger rail line in America, has been repeatedly shut down as the hillsides slide towards the tracks. The data is clear. Sea level rise is attacking the toe of these landslides, removing the natural weight that keeps the slopes from sliding into the ocean. The United States is losing its edge, and the 700 acres in Rancho Palos Verdes are just the first massive piece of the puzzle to break away. For the residents of the Portuguese Bend and Seaview neighborhoods, the geological acceleration of early 2026 has translated into a brutal daily war of attrition against the shifting earth. The numbers, the 4 inches of movement per week, the 700-acre failure zone, cease to be abstract data points when you are looking at your living room floor and realizing the north wall is now 3 inches lower than the south. On July 29, 2024, the Southern California Gas Company made the unprecedented decision to terminate service to 135 homes indefinitely. The ground was moving so fast that the high-pressure steel mains risked a catastrophic rupture. But that was only the beginning. By late 2025, Southern California Edison followed suit, citing imminent public safety risks. Residents like David and Elena Morales, who have lived in their Canyon View home for 15 years, were given just 24 hours. Not weeks to relocate, not days to plan, 24 hours to either find a generator and a portable water tank or abandon their life's largest investment. This is the blackout zone, a 2026 reality where million-dollar homes are powered by the constant, low-frequency hum of diesel generators, and gas is supplied by precarious propane tanks tethered to bucking patios. For residents like Sally Reeves, who has spent over 4 decades on the peninsula, the choice is between financial ruin and a stubborn, dangerous resilience. Reeves has refused to leave, instead investing thousands in a custom-engineered jack and fill system. Her home now sits on a grid of adjustable steel beams. Every few weeks, as the land beneath her slides another several inches toward the Pacific, she and her husband manually crank the house back toward a semblance of level. "It's not just a house," she says during a late-night check of the foundation sensors. "It's our entire history, but you can feel it. When the wind dies down, you can hear the ground itself, the groaning of the rock 100 feet down. It sounds like a slow-motion shipwreck." But the tragedy in Rancho Palos Verdes is not just physical, it is institutional. In early 2025, Mayor John Cruikshank led the city's desperate appeal for $37.9 million in FEMA disaster recovery funding. The request was a lifeline for a city that had already exhausted $64.4 million of its own reserves, trying to stabilize the slope. In January 2025, FEMA issued a ruling that sent shockwaves through coastal communities across the United States. The request was denied. The agency's reasoning was as cold as it was logical. The landslide was classified as a pre-existing condition. Because the Palos Verdes Peninsula was known to be an ancient landslide complex, the federal government ruled that the current catastrophic acceleration was simply a continuation of an ongoing process, not a new disaster. This ruling created a terrifying precedent. If the ground you build on was unstable before you bought the house, the federal government may not be coming to save you when it finally gives way. This creates a geological trap with no escape. Standard California homeowners insurance policies, the very documents people rely on for peace of mind, explicitly exclude earth movement. This encompasses landslides, land subsidence, and erosion. While there is a state-backed program for earthquakes, there is no such safety net for a sliding coastline. The homeowners are caught in a vacuum. FEMA says it's an old problem, and insurance companies say it's not a covered problem. The only exit remaining is the city's voluntary buyout program, funded by a separate FEMA hazard mitigation grant. But the terms are a bit a pill to swallow. The program offers 75 cents on the dollar, based on the home's appraised value as of December 1, 2022, before the atmospheric rivers triggered the current runaway acceleration. For a resident whose home was worth $2.5 million, opting for the buyout means an immediate loss of $625,000, assuming they haven't already spent hundreds of thousands on desperate repairs or solar battery arrays to replace their cut utilities. The logistical collapse is total. Palos Verdes Drive South, once a scenic route for thousands of daily commuters, is now a jagged obstacle course. Monitoring crews from the city's Public Works Department are constantly repositioning flexible water lines that run above ground, draped across the asphalt like giant black snakes, to prevent them from snapping under the sheer stress. In February 2026, the city's geologists confirmed a 7.1% re-acceleration in the Portuguese Bend slide following a week of moderate rainfall, proving that even a standard rainy season is now enough to push the system into overdrive. The ecological impact is equally grim. As the toe of the landslide pushes into the Pacific, it is dumping hundreds of thousands of tons of sediment and suburban debris into the Abalone Cove Shoreline Park, a protected state marine conservation area. The kelp forests are being smothered by the very land they once fringed. This is the reality of a 700-acre collapse. It doesn't just destroy homes, it erases the infrastructure, the ecology, and the financial futures of everyone in its path. As of April 2026, the data streaming from the USGS monitoring wells in Rancho Palos Verdes suggests we have entered a period of permanent instability. The question is no longer if the 700 acres currently in motion will reach the sea, but how much of the surrounding peninsula will be dragged down with it. The city's geologists have confirmed that the early 2026 rainy season, while not as record-breaking as the 2023 atmospheric rivers, was more than sufficient to trigger a 7.1% re-acceleration of the Portuguese Bend slide. This is a critical observation. It proves that the threshold for movement has been permanently lowered. The ground is now so saturated and the internal friction so compromised that even a normal California winter acts as a high-octane lubricant for the failure plane. We are witnessing the birth of a new, hyperdynamic coastline, where the maps must be redrawn monthly. The broader implications for the United States are staggering. The FEMA denial of disaster funding, based on the pre-existing condition of the geology, has sent a chill through every coastal real estate market from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Northwest. If the federal government successfully maintains this precedent, the financial safety net for over $100 billion in American property is effectively gone. According to the United States Geological Survey, 72% of California's 1,100-mile coastline is actively eroding. This isn't just a crisis for luxury home owners in Rancho Palos Verdes. It is a systemic threat to the critical infrastructure that powers the American economy. Just 25 miles to the north, the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach handle 40% of all U.S. imports. While the ports themselves sit on different geological structures, the rail corridors and highways that feed them, like the Pacific Coast Highway and the Lawson Rail Line, cross dozens of pre-existing landslide complexes. If the ground there begins to accelerate with the same 80-fold velocity seen in Portuguese Bend, the supply chain for the entire nation could face a structural heart attack. In the immediate future of 2026 and 2027, Southern California Edison is attempting to maintain the grid using its experimental tension relief strategy. This involves modular, skid-mounted power infrastructure that can be physically dragged by heavy machinery to compensate for the land's movement. It is a high-stakes, multi-million-dollar gamble that has no precedent in modern engineering. If the land shifts more than 6 inches in a single 24-hour period, a scenario that USGS models now suggest is highly probable during a major storm event, the flexible lines will reach their physical limit and snap. The blackout zone will then expand, potentially forcing the mandatory evacuation of hundreds more homes that are currently hanging on to the edge of the slide. The statistics offered by NOAA and the USGS project that by 2030, sea level rise will have increased the erosion rate of Southern California's coastal cliffs by 100%. As the Pacific Ocean eats away at the toe of the landslide, it removes the only thing providing a counterweight to the millions of tons of sliding earth above. This is the ultimate coupled system failure: rising oceans at the bottom and increased precipitation at the top. This is not a problem that can be engineered away with $64 million in dewatering wells or $37 million in federal grants. The geology of the Palos Verdes Peninsula was decided 250,000 years ago, when the volcanic ash first settled into that sleek, deadly layer of bentonite. Human civilization simply built over the top of a clock that was already ticking. Tonight, in the neighborhoods of Portuguese Bend and Seaview, the silence of the blackout zone is broken only by the hum of generators and the occasional sharp crack of a residential foundation splitting apart. The roads continue to buckle, the pipes continue to shear, and the 700 acres of moving earth continue their inevitable march toward the surf. The people living there are the first to face a future that is coming for much of the American coast. A future where insurance is non-existent, the government is stepping back, and the ground beneath your feet is no longer a permanent asset, but a temporary one. Follow the data and it leads to a singular, cold conclusion. The Pacific is not just a view, it is a destination, and the land is already on its way. In Portuguese Bend, the roads are still cracking, the clay is still wet, and the ocean, is still waiting.